Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Eliza, and I'm Tricycle's Special Projects Editor. And thank you for joining. We began these sessions this past spring in response to the pandemic as a forum for practicing with all the challenges that we're facing today. And so, in this spirit, we'd also like to start by acknowledging the immense pain around the continued fight for racial justice that is on the hearts and minds of many of us at this time. And I'd also like to wish a happy Hanukkah to everyone who's celebrating. Our guest today is Leslie Booker. Leslie Booker brings her heart and wisdom to the intersection of Dharma, embodied wisdom, and social justice. She shares her expertise nationally as a guest lecturer on expanding our vision around culturally responsive teaching and changing the paradigm of self and community care. She is a co-author of Best Practices for Yoga in a Criminal Justice Setting and a graduate of Spirit Rock's 4-year retreat teacher training. Booker is also this month's Tricycle Dharma Talk teacher, and it was my pleasure to work with her on her series, which is titled Guidelines for an Ethical Life about the Precepts. And I really encourage all of you all to check it out and watch it. And I'm going to put that link in the chat in a moment. So today she will be offering a guided meditation practice, a short Dharma talk, and answering your questions. And as you can see, we are on a Zoom webinar. So your participant audio and video have been turned off. We're recording this session. You can view the recording as well as the schedule for upcoming sessions at tricycle.org/live, where you can also make a donation to support these free offerings. And finally, we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end of the hour-long call. To participate, please post your questions in the Q&A panel, which is accessible through the button at the bottom of your video screen. If you're tuning in from Facebook Live, please leave your question as a comment and I'll add it to the list. We'll get to as many questions as we can. So thank you very much, Booker, for being with us tonight. And I'll pass it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Eliza. And good evening, everyone. Really happy to be here with you. And I would first just like to extend my deep bows and gratitude to Tricycle Magazine, and especially to Eliza, who I think has perfected the parami of patience while working with me on this series. So thank you so much, Eliza, for all of your hard work. So I'm really excited to kind of share this kickoff evening where I'll be sharing guidelines for an ethical life with you all, which has been this exploration of the precepts through how I've known them and experienced them and sort of played with them throughout my years of practice. And I don't know about you, but I had been on Zoom all day and I had been talking a lot. And so I thought it would be really sweet for us to take a moment to be in practice together, to sort of quiet the hearts and minds and bodies and just drop in so that we can really be present with each other this evening. And so the way that I like to set myself up for practice is to be as comfortable as possible. And one of the beauties of being home is that we can take the postures of lying down, of standing up, of walking, of sitting, any of the 4 postures that allows our bodies to feel a sense of rest and openness and receptivity. And I also like to take a few moments before I begin my formal practice to orient or to resource around the room. So this is an opportunity for us to really support our nervous systems by looking around the room and noticing colors and shapes. And so we'll do this together. So we'll begin by all of us turning our chins over top of our right shoulders, taking a breath in. And as you keep the eyes wide open, we're going to begin to turn our heads, just scanning the horizon, of the space that we're in. And even though this is the space that I'm in all day, this really helps me to know it, to feel it as a different experience. And so I begin to notice the different colors that are in this room. So, what is purple? What is gold? Things that are orange and brown, charcoal and green. And then we notice the different shapes that we might be noticing. So, things that are square or round, rectangle or triangle. Maybe there are things that are star shaped or diamond shaped in your space. Noticing elements of nature. So, depending on what time of day, where you are in the world, there might be the sun setting or the beautiful stars shining. I also noticing the elements of nature, like the plants that are in my space, the sound of my partner downstairs making dinner for us. And then noticing texture. And I like to notice texture both through the sense door of my eyes, but also the sense door of touching. And so I'm holding on to a really soft scarf that's in my lap, feeling my toes as they rest on top of my carpet, feeling the squishiness of the blanket that I'm sitting on. And if I'm still looking around, I'm noticing the smooth curvature of my desk that's next to me. And then, dear ones, let's take a moment to notice the height of the space that we're in. So, noticing the space that is above us. This is not the time to notice cobwebs in the corner, but just to notice the spaciousness above this body. Noticing the width of the space that we're in. So, the space that is to the right of us and to the left of us. And as I do, I feel my shoulder blades sort of open, my heart open. And then noticing the depth of the space that we're in. So perhaps looking on the other side of your camera and noticing the space that is in front of you. And then also looking over the shoulders and noticing the space that is also behind you. And as you come back to neutral, we can begin to rest the eyes. And so, of course, we can rest the eyes by keeping the eyes wide open, holding this soft gaze. So maybe we're noticing shape or light, but we're not really taking in specific information into the sense door of our eyes. We can look down to a spot on the earth, or we can rest the eyes all together so the top lid is gently resting on the bottom lid. And so, as we arrive in our formal practice, whether you are sitting, standing, walking, or lying down, taking a moment to drop into the felt sense of the body. So, how is the body right now? And maybe you're still making some adjustments as you wiggle in and get comfortable into your space. So, how is the body? And how is the breath? And so, how is the breath this evening? Is it shallow and sticky? Is it wide and vast? So just knowing how the breath is at this moment. And what is the quality of the mind? Is the mind still thinking of all the things that didn't get done today? Or if we're in the middle of our day, are we thinking about what we need to get back to? So just how is the quality of the mind? Is there a sense of stillness and ease? Or is the mind active and making lists? And is the mind being gentle to itself? And dear ones, how is the heart today? So taking a moment to drop in and just feel, how is this heart today? Is it as wide as the world? Or is it feeling a little tight and shut down? And so wherever you are with this body, breath, mind, and heart, just know that you're there, not pushing away, wanting it to be any different, but just being present where you are at the beginning of this practice time. And so taking a moment to feel into where there is contact with this body resting on the earth. If the bottoms of the feet are grounded on the earth, perhaps we can lift the toes, spread them wide, and really feel a more intentional connection to the feet rooting down into the earth. If you're sitting up, perhaps you can take a moment to feel into the sits bones and noticing if the body is leaning forward or if we're kind of rolling back. Seeing if we can find ourselves in this present moment. And if the body is resting on the earth, perhaps we notice our sacred bone or sacrum connecting to the earth. The lower back pulling away from the earth as we breathe in. And the back of our lungs and our rib cage resting into the earth as we breathe out. I like to bring a hand or two to the belly just to make sure that I'm keeping my breath low in my body. For those of us who might experience anxiety in our bodies, it's useful to keep the breath low. So I like to explore it through my belly, my hands, perhaps even through the bottoms of my feet. So I'm bringing my awareness up towards my collarbones, out through the tips of my shoulders, and down from my shoulders down to my elbows. And I'm going to bring a little bit of weight to my elbows so my shoulders slide away from my ears. And then bringing awareness from my elbows to my wrist, and from my wrist down to the tips of my fingers. And then bringing awareness to the vibration of my throat as I'm speaking. And perhaps for you, there's a stillness in your throat. And checking in to make sure that I'm not gripping or holding tightly in my face. And so I'm going to rest my tongue on the bottom of my mouth and allowing my tongue to rest at the back of my teeth, to unhinge my jaw and to unclench my teeth. And so feeling the softness of my cheeks. And having the awareness that there is this cool breath that is breathing in through my nostrils. And at the top of this breath, there is this pause, this swirl as that cool in breath turns into an out breath, which is warm as it tickles the top of my lip. And I'm bringing this kind awareness to my eyes that are resting. So whether we are practicing with our eyes open, with the eyes cast down, or with the eyes touching, the lids touching the bottom lid, I'm bringing a sense of softness, this kind awareness and tenderness to my eyes. And also across my brow, my forehead. And I often like to imagine there's a little trap door at the crown of my head. And I like to open up that little door and allow the mind that worries, the mind that doubts, the mind that plans and makes lists. Just allowing that mind to take a moment, to take a rest as I drop back down into the felt sense of this body, cultivating an intimate relationship with the heaviness of these bones, the rhythm of the breath as it expands and contracts. Intimacy with the fire element. So I'm so aware of the heat and the coolness in my body, the goosebumps on my skin. And I bring this kind awareness and attention to knowing the water element in this body. And so things like the synovial fluid that allowed my neck to move from side to side. Noticing the watering of my eye right now as I struggle with my allergies. The dryness of my mouth. The pumping of my heart that allows the blood to flow through my body. And so dropping into this deep knowing of this body as it rests on this earth. Thank you so much for your practice. And I would like to welcome any new friends who have joined us throughout our meditation. My name is Booker, and I am with you all this evening from my home in Philadelphia, where my partner and I moved just a few months ago so that we could vote. And turns out Philadelphia is an amazing city, so we're really, really happy that we're here. And I know that we have friends joining us from all over the world. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm so happy that you could join us. And so, this evening, we are sort of launching my video series, Guidelines for an Ethical Life, which is um, an exploration of the precepts, these 5 ethical guidelines, and the way that I've experienced them in my life and how I've kind of played with them off of the cushion. And so this exploration of the precepts started pretty early on in my practice. After my very first retreat, I, through some effort and a lot of faith, went to Uganda to set a personal retreat with Bhante Buddharakkhita. I had met him on my very first retreat, and I had never seen a Black man in robes, and I was really blown away. And I was really moved by the lightness in which he moved through the world and his enthusiasm for life. And so when Bhante threw out the invitation, he said, "Hey, I'm building a Buddhist center in Uganda. People should come and visit." I was like, yeah. And so about 6 months after my very first retreat, um, I went to Uganda to sit and to practice with Bhante. And during my time there, we spent a lot of time in the world, going to the hardware store and watching him, work with the contractors, and at the same time staying deeply rooted in his practice. And so when it was time for me to go back to New York where I was living, I was really confused on how I was going to take what I had learned and back home with me. And so I asked Bhante for advice. And he said to me, "Your life has to be your practice, and your practice has to be your life. There can be no separation." And I thought, that's some really bad advice. I just, I didn't understand what he was talking about. I was still very early in my practice, just the first few years of my practice. And so I didn't quite understand what that meant. I thought of practice as just being this thing that I do on my cushion. And so my brain really struggled with what this meant, but my body was like, there's some wisdom in that. And my body was like, you don't understand this yet, but let's just tuck away that little nugget and just live with it for a while and see what comes from it. And this is why I always trust my body and its wisdom over my brain. And so I lived with this for a while. And what I really understood was that Bhante was inviting me to have a life that was not fragmented, to live a life with intention and integrity, a life that was integrated and whole. And so I got really curious about integrating my practice into my everyday life. So, not leaving it on the cushion, but actually carrying my practice with me throughout my life. Excuse me. And so, this is when I began to really check out the precepts and how they might support me in this exploration. And so the precepts are these 5 ethical guidelines that we take typically on the first night of retreat, rooted in the foundation of not harming. And so each word that I said, each action that I took, each partner that I was with, I reflected before, during, and after to see if this action was causing affliction to myself, to others, or bringing a sense of harmony and liberation. So, in this, sorry, motorcycles. So, in this 4-part video series, I'm looking at the precepts through the lens of these three kind of guideposts that have drawn great inspiration for me in my life and really where I lean on in my life. And so these three pillars are Dharma, embodied wisdom, and social justice. And so Dharma, these teachings and the wisdom of the Buddha. Embodied wisdom is this leaning into the first foundation of mindfulness, of cultivating intimacy with my body and my breath for that felt sense in my body that lets me know if I am aligned with my values or if I've kind of moved off of the path. Again, knowing if I'm going into deeper suffering, if I'm going more towards my freedom. And social justice. If I truly believe that my liberation is tied up with yours and yours with mine, then my practice is all about alleviating your suffering and caring for you as much as I'm able to. And so, sila is the Pali word for moral conduct, and it gives us a path for how we're going to move through the world and navigate all of these things that kind of get thrown at us on a daily basis. It allows us to take care of ourselves, each other, and the earth that we sit upon. It lays out the groundwork and the foundation to make sure that our heart and mind is attuned to skillful speech, skillful action, and skillful livelihood. So I learned the precepts on retreat, like many of you all probably have as well. And it's all about abstaining, what we're going to abstain from, what we're not going to do while on retreat, including not harming, not stealing, not engaging with our sexual energy, not speaking, and not intaking any intoxicants that can cloud the heart and mind. And for me, the language of abstaining from sounded very dry and boring, and 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 I'd always felt really harsh, and it was really emphasizing this negative bias that we tend to swim in the culture that we live in. Telling someone not to do something is not the same as telling them what to do and why we're doing it. And so we'll be working with this version of the precepts that reminds me that I'm engaging in these practices to support and care for and protect myself and others because we are interconnected. My conscious and unconscious actions will impact you. And most importantly, because you belong to me. And so knowing how deeply our lives are intertwined, I undertake the precept to protect life. Knowing how deeply our lives are intertwined, I undertake the precept to be generous. Knowing how deeply our lives are intertwined, I undertake the precept to protect the sexuality of myself and others. Knowing how deeply our lives are intertwined, I undertake the precept to use space, to use speech that is harmonious and brings people together. And knowing how deeply our lives are intertwined, I undertake the precept to care for these intoxicants, to be free of intoxicants that cloud the heart and mind, creating a barrier for me to have deeper connection to myself and to knowing how to care for you as well. And so I am a Black, queer American woman. And I've chosen to live a life that is fueled by an ethic of love, faith, equity, and justice. And so when this is your social location and the Dharma is your practice, one is very aware of the world that we're living in and all that stands against everything that one might stand for. So I pay attention and I bring these precepts into every aspect of my life as a sort of roadmap to keep me in my integrity, and it keeps my dignity in check. Ajahn Suchito says that in Western society, our sense of what we belong to ends at the edge of our skin. And we can feel that as a society, along with all of my freedoms and abundances as an American. I also know that America is the global leader in loneliness, illness, addiction, and violence. And I think a lot of that comes from a culture that reinforces this myth of being alone, disconnected, and not belonging to anyone. So, knowing how deeply our lives are intertwined, I'm curious, what gets in the way of undertaking the precepts to protect life, to be generous, to care for my sexuality, your sexuality, and those of others, to be careful with your speech, and to care for these intoxicants that cloud the heart and mind? And I want to expand what intoxicants can be, especially in this day and age when we are bombarded with news media and social media and these little handheld gadgets that create this barrier, this inability for us to have deep and true connection. And so I would love to open up and to be in conversation, to hear what's alive for you, to hear what not only gets in the way of you knowing these practices in your everyday life, but also what lifts up and what supports your practice. And so, Eliza, love to know what people are thinking.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that practice and for that Dharma talk. That was lovely. So everyone, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box down there at the bottom or in the comment section on Facebook. And we'll get started with the first question that has come in. Jerome says, have you seen the 5 mindfulness trainings on Plum Village's site? They are deeply connected to what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I've been very, very deeply inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh throughout my life. And so, really having engaged Buddhism be the foundation of my practice, and utilizing my practice as not just for like navel gazing and for my own personal liberation, but really understanding the impact and how my practice really supports my greater Sangha, the Maha Sangha. So absolutely, very deeply inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings. Thank you, Jerome, for bringing that in.
Thank you. The next question is from Caroline, who is asking, have you ever worked with an energy healer during your years of...
I'm sorry, Liza, I lost that. What was the last piece?
Caroline is asking, have you ever worked with an energy healer during your years of practice? Did you get that?
I did, thank you. I haven't. It's a hard question for me to answer because I feel like there's a second question in that. And so I want to say that, working with having the first foundation of mindfulness of body and breath as being such an integral piece of the way that I do my practice, I'm always exploring and working with and engaging with any kind of additional practice that can really support me having an intimacy with my body. And so, again, when we explore our practice, not just on the cushion, but outside of the cushion, we might find that exploring other ways and other practices that can support our practice are really useful, which could be working with an energy healer, anything like that. And I feel, Caroline, there's more to that question. So I'd love for you to actually send me a message so we can kind of unpack that a little bit more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Booker. Everyone feel free to, put questions in the Q&A. But we have a question that has actually come in previous to this on your Dharma Talk series. And I'm going to try to sum it up because it's a fairly long paragraph. But essentially, Medora, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is articulating that they have a really difficult time when ethical precepts are in conflict. When there are sort of two goods, which one do you choose? If the precepts are in conflict, how does one approach that?
So again, I wish that we could be in conversation. I wish we could be in dialogue this evening. But, in my experience, when I'm really committing to the precepts to live a life that has these as the root, um, I don't find conflict. I really don't. And which means that I've also, it depends on how you're looking at it. For some people, they're looking at this as a very, very, very narrow view. And early on in my practice, for example, I was vegan and vegetarian, and I also had been, more sick than I'd ever been in my life. And so I was holding really tightly to this precept of protecting life because the way that I understood it, protecting life meant to not kill animals. Um, and I was taking it so literally. And what I realized is that protecting life also included taking care of this dear one. And so I wasn't going out and killing the animals, but I was taking an animal protein because it really allowed this life to be protected and to be healthy. And also being ethical about where I get my meat source from. And so I've always, at least in the past several years, I've always made sure to get my meat directly from farms and from farmers, and to try and cultivate a personal relationship with those farmers and to visit the farms. And so I have a more intimate relationship. And so I think that when we really take these precepts into our day to day lives, we begin to look at everything that we do, everything that we say, every way that we be, and see what's true for us. And I know that for me, it always comes down to this felt sense in the body. I might get a clenching or a tightening in my heart and my belly, which is an absolute no, right? But when I feel that there's expansion and openness, I'm like, oh, my body is saying yes. And so I invite you to explore every aspect of your life and see how these are showing up and how they're living out in your life. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. I know that's a question that many people think about, struggle
Yeah.
with.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question is from Jane, and she says, in these days of isolation, as I do what I can to remain in contact with others and in communication, I notice fear rearing its head. I think it's because of the pandemic, but it's getting a little more crystallized. And I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
Mm. Yeah, we're living in a global pandemic. And so even if we are not personally impacted, even if we still have a livelihood, even if we still have our homes and a safe place to rest our heads at night, because we are interconnected, because, um, I belong to you and you belong to me, I'm feeling so intently the impact of this global pandemic that we're in. And so strong emotions like anxiety and fear and restlessness seem to be what's kind of like on top right now for most people in the world right now. And so holding that tenderly and knowing that you're not alone, that this is what's happening. And what's been really useful in supporting me with feeling that is to, or when I'm experiencing fear or tightness or anxiety in my body, is to lean on faith, is to lean on faith. And to me, faith is really concrete. So I might bring my hands to my heart and my belly and breathe the breath in. And I have faith that my breath will breathe itself back out again. Or reaching down and towards the earth and knowing that the earth is solid and will support me and hold me. And so that's how I'm working with faith right now. That's how I'm working with my fear. That's how I'm working with my anxiety. And of course, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is right now to lean on Kalyanamita, to lean on our spiritual friends that can really support us in seeing things right sized and helping us to sweep the temple of these three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion that try to make us believe that we're alone in this world, that we are not connected to anyone. And that is this myth that's rooted in white supremacy and capitalism that continues to make us think that we are alone and isolated. And so leaning on relationship has been huge on really helping me to move through this gripping fear that a lot of us are experiencing right now. And I really appreciate you bringing that question because I'm sure a lot of people are living with these really strong emotions and are trying to figure out how to work with them. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Booker. Our next question is from Jessica, and she says, myself and my body have been in conflict with each other for my
Mm.
entire life. For instance, eating disorders, self harm, etc. What would you recommend as a practice to begin rebuilding my relationship with my body?
Mm, thank you, Jessica. And I'm hoping that you are in a healing process. It's really common for us to have a very disconnected, disembodied experience and relationship. Um, in the culture that we live in, a lot of us feel like our our bodies are this thing that kind of lug our brain around, and we don't really pay that much attention to our body. And when we think about living a fragmented life, and that's what I'm hearing you say, that there's like this a battle or this fragmentation of the mind says one thing and the body says can be the enemy sometimes. And so it's really about bringing integration back in towards the fullness of our practice. Our body has so much wisdom to give us. I truly believe that everything that we need to know lives in our bodies. And so when um, I'm actually going to pause for just a moment because I want to make sure that I'm answering your question with a tenderness that it deserves. And so a practice that's really supported me and bringing this integrated life together is the practice of metta. And in my head, I'm like rolling my eyes because it's so cliche, but but there really is something so beautiful about this practice of kindness, of benevolence. When we're practicing metta, we don't get to fragment. We don't get to say yes to you and no to you. Venerable Analayo speaks about the metta as being like the sun at high noon. So it shines its light on everything and everyone without discrimination. And I also think of metta as a practice of protection. And sometimes we need to protect ourselves from our own mind, from this mind that says that this body isn't worthy of love, that this body isn't beautiful, that this body doesn't deserve deep tenderness and kindness towards it. And so I invite you to explore metta as a practice of protecting this dear body, and as a practice that integrates and doesn't leave anything out. And so I hope that's a useful response.
Thank you. Um, our next two questions, we have two questions that I think are quite related, so I'm going to present them together. So Danielle says, thank you for your wonderful practice. I'm beginning in my spiritual journey, and due to the general selfishness of the world and people at large during this time, I'm having a hard time with the idea of being intertwined with others besides my immediate family. Do you think this can have effect on my spiritual path? And the related question is from Ruthie. How do you suggest feeling connected with people who are trying to kill us, the country's
Mm,
leaders who refuse to act on the public health issue of COVID?
yeah.
They're trying to have compassion, but not succeeding, proceeding from anger and hatred to looking at the situation objectively as relative reality. But I don't find a way to go beyond that. I don't want to, not proud of that, but there we are.
I mean, that's real. You know what? That is real. And I think it's important for us to be real about where we actually are in our lives and our practice and our mindsets. If we don't know where we're starting from, then we don't really know where we're going, and we don't know, and we can't really appreciate the path and the journey that we're on. And so, yes, how can we find a sense of interconnection, and that our lives are intertwined with each other? And for both of you, I'm hearing these as hindrances. I'm hearing like aversion. I don't like this. I hate it. Make it go away. Make them go away. And I'm also hearing doubt. Is this interfering with my practice? Can I deepen my practice if I have this tightness in my heart? If I don't have a lot of love for folks in my heart? And so I think of hindrances as not something that hinders or stops my practice, but I really see it as these portals of wisdom that allow me to understand what I need to look at, what I need to investigate. And we don't need to love everybody. We don't need to um well, I guess the saying is we don't have to like everybody, but we do have to love everybody. And so when I feel that someone is creating a lot of harm, when someone is trying to kill me, and as a Black queer woman, a lot of people have been trying to kill all of my identities for many centuries. um, what's been really useful for me is to look at those three poisons of greed, aversion, and delusion, and to realize that when people are trying to inflict harm on others is because they have been poisoned by one of these three buckets. And so when there's this poisoning and the mind is delusional, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're saying. And it's really scary, especially when they're the leaders of our country. It's terrifying. And I know that I don't want my heart to get colonized by greed, hatred, and delusion. And so when I can see how that's impacting other people, it actually conjures up compassion to me. And I'm like, oh, dear one, no one ever loved you enough. No one um, cares for you enough to show you how you're harming others. No one, that there isn't a Kalyanamita, deep, spiritual, noble friend in their lives that is helping them see things right sized. And so my heart turns towards compassion. When I feel it shutting down towards another person, it's typically because there are these three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion that have taken over them. And in order for me not to meet hate with hate, because that's what they want us to do, um, I break free from those chains and I turn towards compassion. And that's allowed me to have this freedom in my body. And it may or may not do anything to them directly, but allows my heart to not shut down. Because when our heart shuts down to those people who are trying to harm us, our heart shuts down to everybody who's trying to give in, to get into our hearts. And so that's how I've been working with that. I hope that's useful.
Thank you. I know it's something so many have been struggling with this year. We
Yep.
have, yeah. We have another set of two related questions. So Colette says, I have been meditating for about a year now. I am in love with everything I have learned so far. I want to go deeper, but I don't know where to start. Thoughts? And quite similar, James says, what suggestions do you have for someone still trying to find the right path for themselves in Buddhism? I've
Yeah.
attended some Won Buddhist gatherings, and I know there is much more. How does one really get into the basic principles and understanding of practice? There are so many forms of Buddhism out there, and it can be overwhelming trying to figure out where to start.
I'm just going to plug Tricycle right quick. I think that's a great place to start. Tricycle's done these amazing video series. The magazine has so many amazing articles in there. And so one thing that I find really useful is um, to read, to see who the teacher is. If there's something that I really enjoy or that I'm really moved by, to check out the other teachings that that teacher is offering, listening to their Dharma talks, going to their websites, even reaching out to them. We're all just home on Zoom right now. So, send us an email. And I also know, again, that it's really, 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 really hard to be on this path alone. And so um, I think one of the greatest things about the global pandemic is that there are so many amazing Buddhist offerings online. You can sit with an amazing teacher pretty much 24 hours a day. And so if there's someone that you like, look them up, see what else they're doing, see where they are. Explore guidelines for an ethical life, check out my series and see what's true for you and see what other people are saying about the precepts. And so we're living in this age of technology, and I typically think of technology as definitely one of like the largest intoxicants out there. And it's also one of the most it's a really amazing thing that can really connect us to so many other people that can support and deepen our practice. And so keep exploring and seeing what's out there.
Wonderful. We have time for just one more question. So, our apologies to everyone that we were not able to get to. But for folks who want to pursue their questions, this month Booker is responding to questions on the page for Guidelines for an Ethical Life. But we're going to end with a question from an anonymous attendee asking, can one be a Buddhist without believing in some of the more spiritual aspects, such as the cycle of rebirth?
Hmm. I think that people can learn and practice the Dharma. If the label of Buddhist feels like it's getting in the way, then just let it go. The Buddha was not a Buddhist. The Buddha was someone who studied with a lot of spiritual teachers throughout his lifetime. And he took a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. And he was able to find what was true for him. And so these teachings that we say are the Buddhist teachings, the Dharma, they're actually a collective of all of these different teachings that he learned from all these different teachers. And so if the label is in the way, let it go. You don't need it. But I do invite you to keep exploring all of these practices of the Dharma and to see what's true for you. And the thing that really brought me to the Dharma and was allowed me to stay in the Dharma, I'm a little bit of like a rebellious type. But the expression ehe passako, to come and see for yourself. And so the Buddha said, don't believe doctrine, don't believe what you read, don't believe what you hear. Go and see for yourself if that's true for you. And if it's not true for you, then let it go. So there's no dogma, there's no tightness around this. So explore what's true for you.
Thank you so much. And on that note, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Booker. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time for your practice, for us all to gather virtually here on Zoom. If you're interested in viewing the recording of this talk, it's on Tricycle's Facebook page right now, and in the morning you'll also be able to find it on our YouTube channel. Please keep checking tricycle.org/live for upcoming session dates in the new year and to view recordings. So may everyone be healthy and happy and safe. And I'll turn it over to you, Booker, if you have any last closing words.
Yeah, so thank you again, Eliza, for your beautiful holding of this evening. Um, and again, I'm just so excited for those of you who are brand new on your practice, for those of you who are thinking about or exploring your practice off the cushion and into your everyday lives. I would love to know what you're thinking, what you're experiencing, what you're playing with. So please, over these next few weeks, please send me a message at Tricycle. You can also check me out at lesliebooker.com. And I have a newsletter that goes out, which shows all the different places that I'm offering my teachings. So looking forward to practicing with you. Thank you so much, dear ones.